Hi everyone, my name is George Gigiashvili. I'm a principal analyst at Omdia, and today I'll be presenting subscriptions as a games model, examining subscriptions' critical challenges and opportunities. Just to give you a heads up on what this presentation will entail, I will first walk you through some of the different types of game subscription services and monetization models that are out there at the moment. I will then talk about success stories of subscriptions in other media, particularly video, and how that translates to gaming. Then I'll talk about why subscriptions has had such a slow start in gaming and how that is changing. Then I'll talk about what impact the rise of game subscriptions will have on the broader games market and what other opportunities that may bring. I will also touch on cloud gaming and talk about how it's inherently tied to game subscriptions. Developer sentiment around subscriptions is something that I will also explore and talk about how that is changing and what is impacting that sentiment. And I'll also then talk about how subscriptions are already effectively used alongside existing monetization models and make some recommendations for developers looking at this monetization model. Right, so let's just dive straight into it. So here at Omdia, we identified 6 main types of game subscriptions that are out there. So first, it's services like Game Pass and PlayStation Now, essentially, which offer a range of games from multiple developers. You then also have subscription services run by publishers, such as EA Play and Ubisoft Plus. And there are also game subscriptions which are run by service providers such as telcos. So, for example, in Germany, Deutsche Telekom runs Magenta Gaming Service, and Game Now, which is operated in Italy by Vodafone. Then we have subscriptions which are essentially for a specific game. So, most popular use of that is perhaps World of Warcraft. Also World of Tanks and many other games got subscriptions offered within the games, which we'll talk about in detail later on in the presentation. Then there are subscriptions for games which offer not only gaming, but there's some extra social elements such as Roblox and Fortnite. Those two are really good examples of that type of subscription. And there are subscriptions which go beyond just playing games, so but they are still connected to gaming, such as Twitch and YouTube gaming. So I wanted to, before we talk about subscriptions in gaming, I want to talk about subscriptions in an adjacent category, OTT video. And if we look back from about 2010 and look at where we are now and look into the future, it's clear that subscriptions have kind of rapidly came out of nowhere seemingly and then dominated the whole category with just shy of 90% of total revenue in 2025 to be generated by subscriptions. This has of course come at the expense of diminishing one-off purchases through rentals and physical retail and so on. But nevertheless, it's important to highlight that the introduction of subscriptions has had a hugely positive impact on the overall growth of the whole category. So with that in mind, the question that comes up a lot is, why haven't we seen this kind of transition to subscriptions in gaming? And there are actually several key reasons for that. And these reasons are low consumer awareness for these type of services. So that's been one of the reasons why we haven't seen a lot of uptake of subscriptions. the technical shortcomings of the platforms themselves. They haven't been very user-friendly or just a bit clunky. The low global penetration of fast internet access, very important when you, especially on consoles, if you're running a service that requires constant downloading of games. And a big one has been limited availability of AAA titles. And really, content is the key driver of any platform, irrelevant of what format is it, music or video. It's the content that people want to watch, listen to, or play, and that has been quite limited up until quite recently. And as I mentioned earlier, kind of slower erosion of physical games has also meant that this transition to digital and subscription has been a lot slower. So if we look at these 5 different factors, which have so far has kind of inhibited the growth of subscriptions, all of these are now changing in many ways. So there is now higher consumer awareness with major publishers and tech giants entering the space and popularizing the idea of subscriptions. And also with that, they've brought a lot more compelling content. For obviously Xbox Game Pass is always a good example of one company kind of really getting behind the idea of subscriptions and putting day one releases on the service. But the same thing can be said about EA Play or Ubisoft Plus and even Apple Arcade. So there's definitely more awareness, and there's faster broadband available to more people than ever before, which I will go on which I will talk about slightly later on in the presentation. And generally, as all platform holders have reported, there is like console platforms, there is a slow but gradual move towards digital from physical. The games market is huge and it will only get bigger. So if we look at the total revenue generated through the consumer spend on games, we see that it will grow from $168 billion globally this year to a whopping $190 billion in 2025, which is amazing. And it's worth kind of comparing that with how we see subscriptions panning out over the next 5 years. So on the same scale here, you see the revenues that we expect to be generated through subscription services such as Apple Arcade, Xbox Live Gold, PlayStation Now, and pretty much all cloud-based services. And as you can see, in 2025, it will be about kind of 10% of the total revenues that we expect for the whole market to generate. So what this tells us is, or at least our belief is, that we're not going to see a drastic change in how we pay for games over the next 5 years. It's not going to turn the whole industry upside down, but rather it will be a complementary way to not only deliver games to players, but also the way and be a complementary way for them to purchase games as well. And driving this is kind of is most evident if we look at some of the very recent numbers, subscriber numbers that Xbox, PlayStation, and EA has revealed. And as you can see in this short space of time, there's been a huge increase in number of subscribers of these services. This is, of course, has benefited from pandemic, but we think that this will continue to grow in the years to come. And the final point here is that even though the overall games market still has respective kind of a very impressive 13% growth expected over the next 5 years, the growth will be even bigger when it comes to subscription services and cloud gaming services. By the way, the chart on the right only has figures for subscription services and does not include the revenue generated by individual games which will offer subscriptions. Now, it's impossible to talk about subscriptions without also talking about cloud gaming. Those two things are very inherently kind of tight, close together, particularly if we look at some of the recent announcements. And even though cloud gaming is not particularly new, really it's only since about 2019 when we've had this kind of renaissance or re-emergence of cloud gaming, which is certainly set to change things. So in 2020, kind of in the beginning of the last decade, you probably remember OnLive, and it promised pretty much everything that cloud gaming companies today are promising, but it was just, in many ways, they were kind of ahead of their time. They just were not able to deliver on their vision because of many things like not great infrastructure, cloud infrastructure. The availability and access to fast internet wasn't great back then. And there were many issues around content as well. So that never really happened. And we all know what happened with OnLive and Gaikai and other cloud gaming services of that time. However, we've seen over the years this build of an entrance of serious players into this space, including NVIDIA and most notably Xbox, Tencent, Google, Amazon, and even Nintendo kind of dabbling in cloud gaming on Switch. So when it comes to cloud gaming, as I mentioned, this will kind of offer essentially another way that companies can monetize the games and reach extra audience. And talking of reaching broader audience, that's kind of has been one of the big reasons why cloud gaming has been so kind of much talked about by the large tech companies. Because if we look at some Omdia data in terms of global installed base of consumer devices which are capable of running cloud gaming services in 2024, we see that over 13 billion devices will be able to theoretically deliver cloud gaming services. So this is really exciting. So this is really kind of looking beyond just gaming PCs and looking beyond game consoles and really reaching a much broader audience who perhaps don't want to buy dedicated hardware to play these games, or they just don't have the means to do that. Another thing that I mentioned earlier was how the access to fast internet and how that has changed over the last kind of decade or so. So in 2013, we only had about 100 million people had access to fast broadband. By fast broadband, I mean anything faster than 30 megabytes per second. So that has grown to 1.2 billion this year. And thanks to 5G, we're going to see this access to fast internet go all the way up to 4.1 billion people. So this is one of the reasons why it's so exciting and why many of these companies are kind of placing big bets on cloud gaming. So cloud gaming itself, in terms of how much revenue we expect it to generate over the next 5 years, we expect that 7.5% of the total games revenue to be generated via cloud gaming. And that's going to be that's up from less than 1% in 2020, which is rapid growth. And as I mentioned earlier, we really see cloud gaming to be a complementary experience to gaming, or even console gaming. We expect more examples of try before you buy on both PC and console when it comes to games, or being able to jump into the game you just bought immediately through cloud gaming, or just basically take your console gaming anywhere with you on your smartphone on the 5G using on the 5G network. Talking of 5G, telcos have been very quick to embrace cloud gaming, and they've been very busy partnering with with many different types of cloud gaming providers around the world. And because telcos, they see cloud gaming as a killer app for 5G, because obviously they're trying to sell 5G tariffs, and they see cloud gaming a very compelling use case for it. And I think they're right. And what that does really, all around the world now, you have companies which game companies, game publishers, developers, and platforms can work with and reach even bigger kind of set of demographic using their existing user base of these telcos. And it's very much is going to be a mutually beneficial partnership, because telcos attract young demographic with cloud gaming, and cloud gaming providers and game developers and publishers gain access to a bigger user base in those specific countries. So this whole space of subscriptions and cloud gaming is getting increasingly complex. And what Brad tried to do here is to kind of create a market map to kind of really illustrate how there are publishers and game companies and tech giants who are kind of playing different fields all at the same time. So I've got this like Venn diagram going here. So on this side, we have kind of game publishers who don't have subscriptions just yet. On the left, we have game content subscription services, which require you to download games onto your device. So that's the likes of Apple Arcade, Google Play Store, and so on. Google Play Store Pass, and so on. And then you have these companies, game publishers, that sit in between. So they offer both, they're both publishers or engines, game engines, or platforms that also offer subscriptions. And you also, of course, have cloud gaming, which I've talked about earlier. And here things get really interesting. So you have Facebook Gaming and Nintendo dabbling in cloud gaming, and of course they are platforms themselves. And you also have cloud gaming providers who also are offering subscription services as well. And here in the middle, you have kind of familiar logos there: PlayStation Now, Xbox Game Pass, Tencent, Amazon Luna. So these are the ones who are kind of trying to do it all on their own. So they're trying to develop their own games. They're offering subscription service. I've got cloud gaming as well. And you also have, as I talked about, kind of subscriptions outside of traditional playing games. Kind of these more like, I'll call them like an esports services, which are also kind of offering subscriptions. So it's like it's a growing and increasingly complex space, but we believe that this is kind of a good illustration of this whole ecosystem. Well, with all this talk of game subscriptions, it's become a bit of a kind of contentious, this kind of issue which is talked about quite a lot among the developers. And here I got some findings from GDC's 2020 and 2021 State of the Industry survey, where GDC surveyed about 3,000 different developers. And this question I thought was interesting, which asked them if they were concerned about subscription services devaluing individual games. And what's interesting here is that in the last year's survey, 56% of them said that subscription services could devalue the individual games. However, this year it was 47%, so almost 10% change, which I think is significant. So it's clear that the sentiment is changing and it's kind of softening towards subscriptions, but nevertheless, just under half of the respondents of the developers are still concerned about this, and I think the game publishers, the game subscription services still have some way to go to really prove to developers that this is not the case. And you've probably seen these stats. Xbox came out a couple of years ago to kind of talk about how people who subscribed to the Game Pass played 40% more games and played 30% more genres, and they saw actually them spending more money outside of the subscription than they did before they were a subscriber. And this is actually echoed by conversations that we've had with other developers, and they confirm that they're also seeing this trend, that once a player subscribes to their service, their platform or their game, they tend to be more engaged, and they just in general spend more money on the game. And similarly, Google Play also confirmed that in 2019 they saw 70% year-on-year growth in number of apps utilizing subscriptions globally. And you've had many testimonials from companies like Scopely and Xflux saying that the people who subscribed, they were more engaged compared with before when they subscribed. And as you know, backing up that claim that there's more games offering subscriptions on more mobile games offering subscriptions, if we look at the top grossing mobile games in 2020 ranked, so the top 15, it's interesting to see that 8 out of those top 15 did utilize subscriptions. And I think this trend will only increase and will move, get bigger, and I expect to see more and more games utilizing this model. However, I don't think that this should be limited to only big developers. It's clear that smaller developers are also utilizing subscriptions. So this is from last year's GDC survey. Again, about 3,000 developers surveyed, and you can see them they're using all sorts of monetization models, and subscriptions is small, but I believe a growing area. So as I mentioned, even though it is the kind of the biggest games that are utilizing subscriptions, I think increasingly there is opportunity for smaller developers to also make use of this, as long as they have existing kind of a loyal user base. I think there is kind of this journey that developers can take their players on and kind of move them onto subscriptions. But it doesn't have to be just subscriptions or nothing. As I'll discuss in a bit, I think subscriptions should and already do work alongside all these other types of monetization, because at the end of the day, it will just come down to every player's preferences, and subscriptions is increasingly attractive model for them. In terms of kind of what benefits subscriptions brings to subscribers and developers, I mean, you guys are probably well versed in terms of like what subscriptions can offer to subscribers. So things like additional quests, items, battle passes, discounts, and unlimited access of library games, of course. But most interestingly, we should look at kind of like what's the benefits to developers and platforms. This, of course, subscriptions provides additional method of promotion for developers. It provides more data and better insights on users. It provides increased user engagement, which has been confirmed by many of the developers who are using this. Greater recurring revenue, increased discoverability of the content. So especially if you're a small developer, being on one of the leading and growing kind of games library subscription services can really help in terms of the recommendation. And I know that Xbox always talks about how the discoverability is very high, because once you know that you're paying for all these games, and then you can kind of let the algorithm kind of tailor what sort of games you like, and they can start to discover games which they otherwise would never have found in, for example, an app store which has thousands of games and it's easy to get lost. Whereas if it's curated in a subscription service, then things get really interesting. And yeah, higher retention and increased revenue, as I mentioned earlier. And to kind of close this off, I just wanted to give an example of how Fortnite in particular kind of moved from just being this free-to-play game and eventually rolled out their subscription services. And I think this is the model that is seen by other games, which are kind of basically moving this player through the journey from free-to-play to subscriptions. And I think this will be replicated by many games moving forward. So how does this work? So obviously, first, a free-to-play game, the player is intrigued. They're not making any purchases yet. They're just figuring out if it's a right game for them. They move on to kind of this regular player. So they're already into the game. They're making some small purchases and microtransactions, but they're not really ready for a big commitment yet. Next stage, and Battle Pass, of course, popularized by Fortnite. They've done a really kind of well with that in terms of kind of move away from increasingly controversial loot boxes and so on, and introduce Battle Pass, which is a bit more transparent, but at the same time increases engagement. And so these players are more dedicated and kind of fits in with that type of a player. So this is an active player, purchases single kind of seasonal battle passes and plays quite regularly to achieve goals. And I believe many of these are kind of ready to take the next step. And next step, of course, is subscriptions, and that's again what Fortnite has done. So these players are more loyal, more engaged, and for many it's more convenient than having to buy Battle Pass every month. And then they're just kind of seeing the developers that we spoke to. They all kind of saw increased level of engagement and see clear and most importantly, these subscribers see clear value in these recurring payments. So it's like a win-win situation both for the developer and for the player. So the important thing, kind of one of the final kind of remarks that I want to make is that kind of looking back at like over the past kind of 10 years or so, it's clear that the consumer behavior around how we all watch videos and how we listen to music has changed quite a lot. So now it's very subscription driven, and that behavior is seeping over into games as well. Inevitably, this is always going to happen. So therefore, it is something that now game makers are increasingly exploring, and they're getting more and more involved in this space, if both the platform holders and developers. So my closing remark would be that subscriptions is not a silver bullet. It will not replace all your existing type of monetization models, but it will rather complement it. The key thing would be to find a right balance between subscriptions and other forms of monetization. The main thing is that based on everything that I've said earlier, it's clear that we will see more subscriptions in gaming going forward. So it will be prudent to kind of start looking into it if you already haven't, and get your kind of strategy together for subscriptions. Thank you very much. I'm George Gigiashvili, Principal Analyst at Omdia. If you've got any questions or you want to say something, here's my email, and you can find me on Twitter at GeoQuinto. Thank you, take care, see you soon.